Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about us at officehours.global. We spend the first hour every day, 7 days a week, talking about media and virtual production. Any questions that you may have, if you're in Mukana, which you have to get through officehours.global, so there's a little bit of a process there, but you can join us there. If you second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about Office Hours 2.0. Andy Carluccio from Liminal is here, and he is going to show you the craziness of what he's been working on and where we're going. It's pretty exciting. So it's going to be a really good second hour, so stand by for that. Tomorrow we have education, and education only. So tomorrow, the second hour, will be education. We don't stream that, so the stream will end at 8 o'clock, and then we'll talk about education. We had some cancellations with our Belfast method, so we will not be doing that at noon, and Nick is out for the week as well. So we'll have education, and we'll move on from there. So that's what we have for the second hour. If you're interested in being a panelist, you just have to raise your digital hand by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can also come in early or late in after hours and just try to check out your kit, make sure that it's all ready to go, and we'd love to have you. All right, let's jump into the questions, Bill.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Mike Emmett has our first question from Melbourne, Australia, and he says, one phrase I've heard a lot in office hours from Alex and others is, we're still figuring that out. Can the panel elaborate the thought processes that go into starting something new, and at which point you go from figuring out to launching?
Go ahead, Leo.
My personal view is that you never ever figure anything out, even after you finish launching, and you continue figuring it out. And I think I figured out, or I'm still trying to figure out my whole of my life. But in reality, is I actually prefer to get things going sooner than later, even if it's a fail. An example we've had recently is Sir Clive Sinclair passed away yesterday, and for the UK he decided to try and figure out how to give people calculators, how to give them personal computers, even tried to figure out how to sort out e-bikes or electric bikes. The last one failed. The other two didn't. Thank you for him being here.
Sorry, I got myself into the wrong. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Leo said. Fail first and fail often so that you can, and don't be afraid of that, because that's the greatest teacher, right? I'll also say when we have our Monday session, I'm going to break down a couple of different projects where I'm going to show you very bluntly how often I've failed in a certain process on one of our streaming pieces. So you can see at every juncture, how did we, what did we try? How did we address the failure? And then how did that change the iteration in the second system? So I think you also need to sometimes take a step back and look at the retrospective process to see how you're evolving and where you need to go next.
Go ahead, Sky.
Swinging for the fences. The person that had the highest home runs had thousands of at-bats that did not make it. So consequently, to try something is because we are in a nutrient-rich environment, and so we're feeling secure in testing, taking one step of faith at a time. And so I've really adopted the word pioneer, because in many ways we're humans. We've always been humans. We're just now doing it on a different platform. That's what I'm trying, is this new platform. Thank you.
All right, go ahead, Rupert.
If you are working on something which you want to release as a chargeable product, you're going to ask somebody to pay for it or pay for the service, then you really need to work out at what point you can do that, and at what point you can stand behind it and legitimately take somebody's money for providing it as a service. That may also depend on how well you can articulate the system to other people in your team, so you can have some help with it, or how well you've documented it so you can remain accountable. And accountable is really the final part of it. Can you be accountable for it if you are taking somebody's money to provide it?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I just think leaders are, you hear the phrase, leaders are learners. And so it's a process of continually improving everything. And so as we learn more, we're going to apply more. And as we learn more, we figure out in our own heads that we have never arrived. So we're not there yet, and we know it. But, by improving and helping everything along, whatever organization you're part of, it's not only is it just interesting to you, but it's also kind of fun along the way as you begin to apply the new principles and have that process of continual learning.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Sorry. Yeah, and remember that once you launch, you're going to have to do your own tech support probably, or you should do your own tech support. So be prepared for a deluge of people not reading the instructions.
That's it. You know, I have equations for lots of things. I tend to be a math person, and so the equation that I use for how I move forward with things is R equals C squared. So that is my thing, and that is risk equals the chances of something going wrong multiplied by the consequences. So R equals C squared is an important thing to think about. And so when you can lower the consequences, when you can create an environment like we've done here, where the consequences are low for failure, in fact, they're almost encouraged, then the chances can be high, and it's still okay, and then the risk is still low. So you want to kind of think about places that you can find areas of low consequence of that you can test things on, and that might be in a lab, that might be in public, but you just have to understand what the consequences are and what the chances are. When the consequences become very high, I've worked on projects that would move a stock price by $1 billion or more when we do it for the stream. Consequences are really high, so the chances you have to reduce the chances of anything going wrong to very low, very, 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 very low. Which means we stop experimenting like a month out, and we're just sitting there, and we start testing 2 weeks out, and there's no good ideas, no new ideas, no experiments, no nothing, because it has to go out the right way. And so you want to think about that consequence all the time, related to where you take experiments and so on and so forth. That said, you have to. I mean, the reason we've gotten to where we are here is because we experiment. We experiment a lot, and we've created a culture where that's okay. And so you want to find places like that you can do it. I think that it's really difficult to move forward if you can't find sandboxes that you can experiment in. Next question.
Moving on, the next one comes from our friend Guy Cochran in Seattle, and Guy says, "Can Jonas shared any learnings from the production he was on yesterday?"
Go ahead, Jonas.
Nothing specific other than big teams are fun. It's fun to work in a large environment. You need comms are really, really important, and and Twitch is also, if you handle it correctly, can be a really interesting platform.
Next question.
Ernest Floyd in Bastrop, Louisiana is up next, and he says, "What is the best OpenVPN client for the M1 Mac?"
Go ahead, Jonas.
I really like OpenVPN Connect. I have that on everything, on my tablets, my phones, my PC, because if I work on different projects, I just get a new file, load that in. So if today, for example, I have to do something for when Mobley's show, then I switch on that file, or if I need to do something for John Barker's show, I can switch on that file, and it's a really nice graphical interface, and it just works.
Go ahead, Jason.
I agree. OpenVPN Connect is excellent. I've also had great luck with TunnelBlick in the past. The trick with M1 Max, though, is that you have to enable legacy extensions, so that's not going to work forever. I'll put links in the chat.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next, and Douglas says, "How would you perform an audio-video sync test if you're using a live input as the source? Would you clap your hands and eyeball the offset?"
Go ahead, Jonas.
So one of the things that you can use is a sync test like this, and then you show it to the camera, ideally on a phone, have maybe a lav mic to the speaker, and then you just record your stream and check the offset. In theory, you can also automate it in Isadora, of course, with some blinking colors and audio, and then Isadora can tell you how much latency you have between.
Leo?
So for live events, if you haven't got those things, the two things you do is, as you said, a clap test. And the second thing is why people say Peter picked a pickled peppers is because the P's are a letter that you can easily see as it's defined. It actually takes a lot of practice, and the more practice you do it, the better you get at it, and people are very refined at doing it.
Yeah, usually we will use a sync test to get it right, but we use a P test to make sure that we're right on, because naturally is it working? And then we have them talk naturally and just read the news and just take a look at it and dial it in. Sync is important and often missed. so it's there. But the easiest way to do it is to have two things that are going to make like a slate, like a $8 slate that you get from Amazon that you can just set up there and go whack. And then you look at the file. And what we do is what I do is I grab the segments. Like if I'm streaming, I will grab the segments on the other end and pull them in and analyze them in a NLE, and that tells me where I'm at. If that's the cheapest way to do it, the most effective way, that's when money is no object, is what's called a Hitomi matchbox. You just plug it in, you feed the video into it, it just tells you what it is. Go ahead, Jonas.
And what's really important if you're on a professional set, don't only do it on one point, do it on all the cameras with the specific settings you'll have on the day of shooting. So sometimes you have different cameras for different angles. You might have some converters between, and find the middle ground. Or in the camera that people will talk into the most, take that one, and not like we had sync tests with the GoPro. That isn't helpful at all for the area that you're using for the main shot. Just a thing to keep in mind.
And often wireless will be a frame behind. So you just have to know that if you've got a wireless camera, you may lose a frame or two, in the wireless transmission and the tools that happen to get it back to you. And oftentimes we will sync for the wireless because usually a wireless camera is something people are talking into. And we as human beings will always give you more room for the video to be ahead of the audio, because in the real world, when you see something far away, we see it before we hear it, even by a little bit. You lose a millisecond every 10 feet, I think. So if someone's, 100 feet away, they're already 10 the video's coming to you 10 milliseconds ahead. so the, or it's a millisecond a foot, I think, actually. So I can't remember now while I'm talking, but the point is that you are, your brain will handle video coming in early much better than audio coming in early, because audio never comes in early unless you're sick. So go ahead, Kyle.
I just wanted to give an example of out of sync, which is what I am right now. And Leo showed me a 5, 4, 3, 2,
that's
1.
That's way out of sync.
Way out of sync.
Yeah,
but also, I wanted to mention speaking of the sticks on set, as from an actor point of view, be mindful of soft sticks that are a very important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
James in Dublin, Ireland is up next. And James said, I always get excited when I see Andy on the panel. Does he have any exciting news to share?
Andy?
I'm excited to see you too, James, wherever you are in cyberspace. And today we're going to talk about, obviously, the Office Hours 2.0 system. Other than that, stay tuned. We have more updates coming to Zoom OSC and Zoom ISO soon. So keep your ears out for that. And we'll have a fun conversation today.
All right. Next question.
Brett Ramsey in Melbourne, Australia says, yesterday, Chris Fenwick mentioned a catalog database for his archive footage. I used to use Keyflow Pro, but now that seems to have disappeared and does not work with the latest Mac OS. What's Chris using for his archive catalog?
Chris?
Disk Catalog Maker. It's called Disk Catalog Maker. It's, I don't know, it's 20, 40, 50 bucks, doesn't matter. It's totally worth it. You launch a disk, a little window pops up and it says, do you want to scan it or do you want to scan and eject it? Which is very good because you just hit scan and eject and it goes, and it pulls the whole directory structure from that drive, puts it into the database, and it ejects it so you can load your next disk. After that, we updated from one that didn't work before the big Mac OS updates a year ago or whatever, and we weren't able to import the data. It was weird. I tried for about an hour one day from the old database into this, so we just scanned all the drives again. 300 drives took a little while, but it's good to spin those things once in a while anyway.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he asks, how well does Isadora run in the cloud?
Go ahead, Andy.
So we've seen a bunch of different configurations. Obviously, if you just spin up an EC2 Windows instance, you can launch it on there and it won't complain too hard. We tried to figure out, though, can we do this with elastic GPUs? Can we do this without GPUs? And Aaron actually is the one you might want to check in on for this, because he had a whole bunch of things figured out and tried a bunch. Some systems we weren't able to get NDI working on, but we could get other things working, other configurations it was reduced. But generally speaking, it can work pretty well, especially if you're only doing show control. If you're just bringing in data, converting it, and sending out other data, it should be pretty easy to do that.
Go ahead, Jonas.
And it really runs really well on a G4DN instance. We had one show where we used Isadora to queue 4 really complex video playouts. They were all going over NDI.
And just as correction, it's a millisecond per foot. Somehow I started going 10 milliseconds a foot. It's or 10 feet per millisecond. It's a millisecond per foot is the delay that audio has. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, up next. With what resolution chart image would you recommend for testing through Zoom? And any tips on how to analyze it for testing transport rather than camera, performance?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. For the last few days, Rotem during after hours has been broadcasting this one chart that I really liked. I contacted him. He sent it to me. If you're interested in it, Andy's got it up right now. So if you're interested in it, I can send you that image as well as a couple others. The thing that we've noticed, and anybody who knows better, please tell me. In the center, you see a big circle. Can you pin that one more time? In the center, you see a big circle, and just to the right of it, there is a tall palm tree of vertical lines, I call it. And if you, thank you, who's doing that? That's very clever. So if you can see those lines distinctly down to the bottom, it would appear to me that shows that you have at least 1080 resolution. If your resolution drops, let's say it dropped to 640 by 360, somewhere between the 580 and the 720, what will happen is that'll null out and just be solid gray across there. And
now technically, you should be able to see those all without any version of Mirai, which we don't see here. So, and that probably has to do with compression, because you can still see the lines at the bottom. But when you're watching this on an uncompressed signal, these lines will never have the Mirai that you see there now.
When the lines on your shirt are too close for TV, that's amore. You can sing that. When the lines on your shirt are too close for TV, that's amore.
When the oh man, there's a song there.
I wrote that 35 years ago.
How do we not have the remotes do a whole song on Mirai? Anyway, so that's Courtney.
And if you're trying to test the resolution on your camera and you're using a printed res chart like the one, make sure it is mounted on a stand and don't just hold it in your hands, because if you're moving it, the compression will screw up all the resolution because it can't handle anything moving that's fine resolution.
Next question.
Rupert McRae is back from Dallas, Texas. He says, I have a list of 522 NAB exhibitors. How many shall we invite to office hours?
There's not that. We don't want to invite all of them. There's a lot of them we don't need to talk to. But I think that what we should do is look at that list, or look at the things that we think that we'd like to see. I'm reaching out to some interesting companies and people to see what we can do as far as bringing people in. There is an opportunity right now for us to probably reach out to folks and giving them an opportunity to sit in front of a couple hundred people talking about what their product is, something that's interesting, especially this group. So the best thing to do is use the second hour suggestions and put them in there and vote on them, because that's going to tell me that there's a lot of people that are interested in that person or that thing, and I am working on that. So we'll see what we can do as far as filling out the schedule with folks that would have been at NAB. Next question.
Andre Dalla in Berlin is up next, and he says, is it possible to find the second hours of the first 30 episodes of Office Hours anywhere? On YouTube, it has the 2-hour sessions that begin in mid-July 2020. As I joined Office Hours in 2021, I started to watch the older episodes to learn even more.
Sky.
Well, I'm actually just coming in to talk about the Discord has a thing called chat links. So if we find those, there was early days, a gentleman before me was scraping all of the quotes and answers in the chat, and you'll find that information over on Discord. And then I'll let Jeffrey talk about how he started segmenting those sections.
Yeah. So, and we didn't post those before. and in the first 30, I don't think we had a second hour. Like the second hour was something that became a thing. It was not something that, this is the most organic thing I think I've ever built or I've ever worked on. I don't even know if I built it. We built it. But I, it's just kind of this organic, oh yeah, let's add this. By the way, I just want to take this moment to say in the organicness, when Zoom OSC is requesting Zoom ISO is requesting 1080p of every person, the panel looks amazing. Like it's not, we're cheating. It's so great. Anyway, so all right, next question.
Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas is up next. Some countries have stringent safety regulations for portable electrical equipment. In the UK, for example, it's known as portable appliance or the PAT testing, requiring regular certification. Has anyone faced this as a barrier when on location?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, it depends on whether you're doing work for a university or a government body and what have you. Here in Australia, we have a test and tag procedure that you need to be a qualified electrician to be able to get the authorization to do the testing and tagging. But any university, any government sites are very, very much on the ball of making sure it happens. Most corporate sites are catching up. And it's all about safety. So it's worth getting your gear checked on a regular basis.
Go ahead, Jonas.
Of course, we in Germany have something similar, pretty straightforward. There are venues that won't let you plug in your equipment if it isn't tested. And it's not only extensions, like if you're walling with your rack, they want to see the stickers on all the rack equipment. And yeah, you don't want to have that problem.
Serge?
In my country, it's a little bit more loose than that. I did IT freelance for a few years. Never anyone verify anything of my installation, even though the A+ certification talk about it. Never one checked it.
Yeah, I will say that the most stringent that we've worked in around the world is Australia. Like that is definitely the high point of it, followed by Germany and then the UK. And those are those three are of all the countries. I probably worked in 40 countries, and that's the range. And then after that, it's all the same. No one cares. It's those three countries care a lot, and then no one else asks us anything. Next question.
Kyle Holiday in Dallas, Texas. For the panelists, what do you consider the optimal point for shading your cameras?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Everyone say it with me. In the camera. If you can control it there, you have the best quality. If you're doing it downstream, like I could do it here in NDI, that's actually manipulating the video signal. It's not shading the camera itself. You want to do it in the camera, even if it means reaching up and setting the iris and setting the shutter speed and setting the ISO or the gain level manually.
Some of that also depends on bit depth. So if a camera is capable of outputting a high bit depth, 10-bit or even 12-bit, we have some cameras that are able to do that. You can shade it. You can shade a 12-bit on the far end because you've got 4096. I mean, you still have clipping issues, but you can do a lot of fine adjustments there without losing data or especially going back down to 8-bit. So it depends on the bit depth coming out of the camera as well. Next question.
Tim Holmes in San Lorenzo, California says, what is better, Epochcam, NDI camera, VDO.ninja? Are there use cases for each application? And is there something better?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Okay, firstly, Epochcam, I haven't used, but I just Googled them quickly, and the first blurb is it works over Wi-Fi. So they're pushing the works over Wi-Fi, which means don't use it. NDI is easy within your intranet. VDO.ninja is absolutely fabulous for if it's got to come over the internet and into your system. And that's the clear difference. I would say VDO.ninja is easier to set up than SRT.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So one of Epochcam's party tricks is that it'll present it if you connect it to your computer over a wired connection, like a Lightning. If it's an iPhone, it will present to the computer as a USB webcam, like a UVC webcam. It will do the other things like Wi-Fi also, but that's kind of where it can be useful, is to get it presenting as a webcam. NDI cam, like Stuart says, will work over Wi-Fi, but if you have a wired Ethernet adapter for your phone, you can run it over Ethernet, and that may help you with some different use cases. The NDI cam app, though, gives you very little control over the camera. I mean, I think you get exposure and zoom maybe, but nothing else. I think as a group, we've seen the best results of getting a camera feed out of a phone by using Filmic Pro. And then you can come out of that with an HDMI if you have an HDMI adapter into either like an ATEM if you have one, or if you don't, something like a Cam Link. But I think that's where we've seen the best results for camera performance.
Yeah, absolutely. On the iPhone. It's not available on Android. Next question.
It is.
Oh, it is?
Yep.
Filmic Pro is?
Filmic Pro on the Android, yep.
Okay, I'm wrong. All right, thanks. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, up next with, as a freelancer or a subcontractor, and if you work on location, is branding yourself and your equipment with logos worthwhile, or is it being a white label service of more value?
Go ahead, Serge.
I think being a white label could be a very good value. Tagging your equipment or having a polo with your tagging and logo, it's fine. But something I saw during my freelance years is a company that tagging client equipment. That's a no-go. Don't go there. They will hate it, and they will remove it just after you left.
You go, Stuart.
Yeah, this is one of those things that will be in the contract as a freelancer, whether the people who are sub-hiring you want your logos there, or they want your own logo or their logos. Sometimes they will even provide you with a stick-on panel to put on your cases that has their logo. But again, it'll be in the contract. And I pretty much always presume, even if it's not in the contract, they don't want to see, or that they don't want their clients to see other companies' logos. So ask about it, and you'll probably be provided with a logo to put over the game.
Sky?
Yeah, I'm going to call a Mickey here, and it depends, because I'm very much a believer in branding because I want my equipment back. But also, if I'm at a stage or a theater, oftentimes theater black, they don't want you running around. So how garish is your logo? Are you branding yourself? That's the challenge, I think, there. Or are you working, as you say, as somebody else's, as a subcontractor? So I would say it depends, but you want to keep your name out there, as well as you want to get your equipment back.
Good, Bill.
I have small P-Touch labels that are very small, hidden on every piece of equipment, because if somebody says, I don't have a cable or I don't have something else and I need to take it on set, I want to be able to identify mine because things look the same. But I never put overt branding, because if I'm being called in to help somebody on their set, it's not my set. I don't want my brands all over that. I want them to feel comfortable calling me.
Richard?
Yeah, I'd agree with Bill. P-Touch labels on everything. Branding to identify your equipment from everyone else's is probably the best thing. But it's less about the branding and more just about the identification. The work is what speaks for it, not the brand.
Go ahead, Courtney.
And a lot of guys did it in Hollywood because a lot of people have tools on the set and duplicate tools, from different people. So they spray a color. They choose a color and they will spray that color on each of their tools or cases or anything that you would see a duplicate of somebody else. And that way you can keep it organized, and it doesn't brand it in such a way as it tells the people you're subcontracting for that you're trying to get their job.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Oh, I yielded, but I will add the fact that a bottle of nail polish is always a good thing to have in a specific color, because then you can label up your cables fairly easily and have that in your case really small.
Go ahead, Jonas.
I often get brought in as the person that fixes the system after it's broken. So what I do is all my bags where my equipment is in are clearly branded, because people come up to me, do you happen to have X? And I mostly have everything that they need. So the person that is needing it sees my logo, but as soon as they take it out, it's just branded with a small P-Touch label with an arbitrary name that doesn't make sense to anybody else. And so I can just tell if that's on there, it's mine.
Yeah, for most of the shows that we work on, I think that everything's sourced from so many different places that I don't think anyone really cares what's on the boxes. We spray paint all of our cases with logos because we just want to make sure that when they're coming out of the trucks, oftentimes we have a piece of paper on it that says what room they have to go into and where they have to go and everything else. So you figure out what truck they come out. But when they get lost, you want to have a logo and a contact information on the thing that's painted on it, so it doesn't get missorted in that process. And we, sorry, we have a lot of logos on stuff. What we don't do is do it overtly. We don't do it like we're trying to market, but the logos don't hurt. The most valuable thing actually for us that's probably made us more money than anything else were the green faces for our elementals, because people on tours would go by and like on the back end of a thing, and they go, what are those green ones? They're like little green lights that go across the front of our elementals. And someone would come over and talk to me and ask me what those were, and then I'd tell them, and then I'd have a new client. Like these, because it let me talk about the value of hardware encoding, and because they're like, well, we have people who use Wirecast, and we're like, yeah, we used to do that, and then we got these, and then we had a new client. So you having little things. The other thing I would say is if you're going to brand stuff, if you're going to put any kind of image on it, make sure it's clean. Like connecting your logo to things all hanging out and not really working and looking like they fell off the back of a truck is not necessarily a way to advertise yourself. Next question.
Ernest Floyd's back from Bastrop, Louisiana. What OpenVPN client do you recommend for my M1 Mac?
Go, Jonas.
I think we just answered that one. It's
Yeah, I think we did.
OpenVPN Connect.
Yeah. We like that one. Go ahead. Next question.
Okay, Stuart Douglas Carmichael is up next with, have any of you delivered projects for major streaming service providers like Netflix, and how difficult are their technical standards to meet?
Jonas.
There is an interesting way to get your videos onto Prime Video for Amazon, and I've done that route for a few times now. It's hard if you don't know what you're doing, but if you are, it's a pretty easy spec. You just put in, they say, in value X should be Y. You put that into your encoder. 3 days later, you get an angry email from the engineers because you missed one value, and then you fix it, and then fine.
Yep. Stuart?
There's slightly unknown rules when it comes to getting stuff on Netflix. Firstly, there is a very long list of technical specifications you have to meet, but it's really only for Netflix sponsored or Netflix produced programs. They will buy anything if it's already finished and if it is a good image output and good quality sound. So don't be afraid to shoot something on a camera that's not on their list, or record audio on a piece of equipment that's not on their list. If you do it properly, they will buy it if it's compelling television.
But I will say that the best thing to do with Netflix is their list of what's required is an unbelievable manual of how to produce good work. Like it is, they have their specs on how to do that. Like you should read that whole. There's a sheet that you can find somewhere on Netflix's website that is like production guide or whatever. They are doing more work than anyone else in the world. They are looking at it over top of. I have friends who are. That oversee the production of that process, and they are looking at all of it and figuring out what works and doesn't work, and constantly updating that manual and constantly saying this is the thing that makes it good and makes it work. And it is the most valuable production manual in existence. It is the gold standard. If you follow those rules, you don't have to follow them, as Stuart said, but if you follow those rules, your production quality will bump up a fair bit. And if you keep going down that path, you want to build your muscles around doing it that way, so that when you have to actually produce it that way, it's not like, oh, I got to learn all these new things. Like you want to learn those things in little bits and pieces. It's an incredible manual that's written. It's constantly updated and written by some of the smartest people in the world when it comes to production. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Anybody that came up with submissions to NPR is a piece of cake.
Yeah, exactly. Next question.
Andy Carluccio here on the panel from Washington, D.C. has a question. Renting a projector that takes L630 power, but the venue does not have a nearby outlet at that spec. Is there any way to convert the nearby Edisons, or will that violate the power draw specs?
So that the theater only has the theater only has Edisons.
Well, yeah, they have a L630 in the shop, but it's nowhere nearby where I need to hang this thing, and I wouldn't be able to do a realistic run. So one of the things I'm considering is an adapter like this, and then adapting out to the correct outlet type. But I have not had to do this in quite a while, so I'm wondering, is it kosher to be able to take those two Edison connectors, bring them in here, and then bring it out to the projector unit, or am I getting myself in a pickle here?
I have only done it the other direction. So I have never combined Edisons together. Theoretically, it works in my head, that it would work, but I'm not certain as to.
Yeah, I'd say it checks out on paper.
Yeah.
But I just was curious if anybody had practical. The other option we have is stage pin. I could come out of stage pin and do something else with a different type of converter.
I would feel more comfortable with stage pin. Like adding more. I think I would use stage pin before I would combine two Edisons together. That'd be my 2 cents. That's asking consumer connections to do something professional often leads to fire.
Yes, especially with a rental where you don't want to have that happen, right?
Yeah, so
an expensive issue to have.
Go ahead, Courtney.
One other consideration, if you're using two Edisons and they're on separate breakers, if one of the breakers blows and it drops you down to one Edison, I don't know what that little adapter is going to do. Hopefully it will detect that and shut off the circuit so it doesn't overdraw.
Yeah. But I would look for a pin, something to work with the stage pins. Next question.
Vic Hernandez in Springfield, Missouri is up next. I'm an audio guy that wants to expand into video, primarily to help my firm with upping their video conferencing game. Are there any remote training or procedures the panel recommends?
Go ahead, Sky.
As a video guy, Vic, don't do it. No, video is a team sport. It really is. And so all that you know about video, audio is something that I've delved into on the video side. Yes, there are places. I actually follow some very simple things on LinkedIn, believe it or not. Also Muse storytelling. And there was another story concept that I'll put in the chat session. But again, if you have to do it, learn just the cuts only. Because for your video conferencing, that's often you'll capture something, they'll want it shorter, they'll want just little segments. So learn cuts only first, and then understand that graphics and all the other technical things get tricky.
Jason, real quick.
6 months ago, I would have said lynda.com. At this point, I would say learn a little bit and then go into after hours. It's just such a good resource.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill, real quick.
I'm just going to say that just remember that anytime you cross disciplines like that, getting as good as you are at your core discipline is going to take as long as it took the other one.
Jeffrey?
I did my Resolve training with Ripple. Was it Ripple? Yeah, Ripple, and they did a great job online.
The one thing I will say is that it's much easier to have for audio people to learn video than video people to learn audio. That it's 100% of the time. If I'm going to train someone that is one or the other, I want an audio person, because I think that all the buses and all the other things that they have to figure out makes it easier for, video's easier. So that's the good news. The best thing to do is to do a lot of it and come into after hours or office hours and ask questions. That's probably the fastest way that you'll learn, for those materials. I mean, we literally sit around 21 hours a day talking about this, and all you have to do is come in and ask, and you'll absorb faster that way when you're doing something. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next with, for large control room style screens at home, what display would you suggest?
I would suggest I would look at either Vizio or Samsung. Both of them make relatively good 55 inch monitors that are not very expensive, for control room style stuff. You don't want to, for a lot of stuff you're going to put control room kinds of things, you don't want to try to pay for a color accurate monitor. So you just want to have something that's going to hold it up that doesn't cost too much when you burn it out and you need to get another one. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, a major LEO satellite internet company mentioned giving sailors on a warship live streaming over Netflix. How would Netflix manage delivering a smooth stream to an unreliable wireless connection?
Go ahead, Leo.
Okay, so although you say live, most of what Netflix actually does is buffering. So it doesn't actually matter how bad your connection is within reason. It actually does some tests. When you start Netflix up and other stream services, you'll see it does something where before it makes that boing noise, it's actually trying to see how fast your connection is and try and work out how fast it can send it to you. And then it will just buffer. So you'll just get a longer and longer and longer buffer if it thinks you're on a slower connection. If you're talking about live sport, which Netflix are doing a lot of live sport at the moment, again, it's exactly the same. It's just sending to you. That's the one thing that's very different to this. We aren't doing a one-way send, which is why we need fast connections in both directions.
Go, Rupert.
So LEO in this case is referring to low Earth orbit satellites. So that would be the same category as Starlink, although there's some other people doing it. But offshore on vessels, whether it's warships or anything else, it's actually surprisingly easy, although expensive. I mean, at sea, you have access to vast amounts of sky. So you get uninterrupted, unhindered access to satellites other than weather, but there are ways around that. Satellite offshore uses stabilized antennas. So that's usually a dish enclosed in a dome, that's called a radome, and it is completely counterbalanced and stabilized and motorized on three axes, and it locks on satellite by taking a number of sensory inputs like GPS, gyro, accelerometers, and signal strength from the carrier signal. And that ship or vessel can be tossing around all over the place, but that dish will stay locked on target through all of that automation. So it can be actually very stable.
And Rupert wins the answer of the day. Go ahead, Jonas.
And knowing Netflix, and depending on how big that specific ship is, they might even have a cache local on the ship and know what the sailors want to watch.
Next question.
Serge Blondin of Montreal, Canada. Who did order the new iPhone 13, and what is your delivery date?
Serge?
So I did order, and by experience, I never hesitate more than a second to try to pass an order and retry, because sometimes the few first minutes, the system will crash. My tips is use an iPhone, use the Apple Store app on the iPhone and order from there. It's my best experience. And then after that, you can cancel, but at least you have your reservation done.
Jason?
Let's see. It just updated. Looks like a Pro for the 24th.
Dagnabbit. Yeah, I thought that the order was on the 24th, not on the 17th. So this morning I went in, but I was already 45 minutes late or whatever from everything. So mine's October 6th to October 11th. So that's what happened in an hour.
In 45 minutes? Oh.
Yes. So it's now October 6th to October 11th. So I missed my window. So anyway, $2,000, like $1,950 for the phone. Like I paid $2,000 for a phone. That's all I gotta say. Like it's like I looked at it.
It's a camera that makes phone calls.
And then I pushed the button. Like I was like, I got to do it because it's my job for my show. So, or not my show, but the show I'm on. Next question.
Ernest Floyd, Bastrop, Louisiana, back. It seems there are availability issues for a mixpre-three or a Motu 2. What do you recommend as an alternative? It's for a city council meeting that I'll be broadcasting to YouTube.
Go ahead, Leo.
So I'm reading the question and it says about broadcasting, and because it's saying broadcasting, not recording locally, I'm going to say a Flow 8, which you can get from the UK. We've been having more and more people on this panel, and after hours going towards the Flow 8s. We set another one up this morning for 4 channels and for delivery out to Zoom. It's great.
I go ahead, Tim.
He just answered it. Thank you.
Yep. Stuart?
I've mentioned it before, and I'll mention it again. I love this one because don't forget, you won't just be recording one person. You'll have people that come in, and the council is going to want to have more microphones there, so more channels. Those Yamaha mixers are so quiet. It was beautiful to work with.
Good, Courtney.
And I'd suggest the Zoom F6. They are available now, and there we go. You can add it to your cart for $700. It has auto mix on it. It has 6 inputs and it has a USB interface, so it'd be a good thing. And it does 32-bit float recording, so you can record the whole thing and not worry about people shouting, which tends to happen in city council meetings.
How many mic inputs are in the Flow 8? Leo?
2? 4. 4 mic inputs. And if you want to go higher, obviously it's the XR18 is your next bump up on that range.
And I've used the XR18 a fair bit, and it's great. The delay thing drives me a little crazy, how you do delay, but outside of that, it is incredible value. Next question.
Serge Blondin, back here from Montreal, Canada. Yesterday, After Hours worked as a group to help a participant with its audio disconnect in Zoom. Can we share any detail?
Go ahead, Serge.
Yeah, it was my first time to really be part of the group and working together to try to resolve a situation. and it was fun. It was a great experience to share ideas, bounce ideas together, and push back each other to go further and be the best brain we can have.
Go ahead, Rupert. It's
Sorry.
over.
Yeah, we did a band troubleshooting on this. You know, it's an intermittent problem on his receive audio only in Zoom, and it seems to happen periodically for a period of a few seconds, quite often when there's a lot of audio activity in the meeting. And we went through the whole networking stack and all kinds of things, but actually had 2 internet connections and through different ISPs, and was able to connect a second computer which had the same problem on the first network but didn't experience the problem on the second network. So it's almost certainly a UDP transport problem over his ISP, but we did a lot of digging on that.
And one of the things that's important is the failures, the troubleshooting is something where you learn sometimes the most of what you're going to figure out, of how to figure something out. So and this is how I got to Lucasfilm, was doing troubleshooting for people over an AWS or AOL forum, where I would just try to fix things, for everybody. And I learned more than I did anywhere else, just trying to work out other people's problems that I didn't understand, because I was like, I don't have those problems yet, because I'm some kid in Denver that has never done any film, done anything. So I'm just going to help everybody else do that thing. And I just kept on trying to fix everybody's problems and just use those as my guide to learning, how to do what I do, and so it's really valuable, those types of sessions. So leaving after hours open isn't a bad idea. Even just listening to it will help. Next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand is up next. And he says, the last show it was mentioned that anyone can contact Zoom support and get bumped up to 720p. Does that mean that me as a meeting participant will now be in 720p? Or does it mean that meetings and webinars I host will be 720p? Or does it mean both?
Andy?
So it means that once you get the petition through, your account will be able to create meetings at 720p. It does not mean it'll follow the same policy as like a Facebook portal, right, where it just has to log in and appear for a certain amount of time and bump the meeting. No, it's based on your account and being able to host that account. Really, the upshot of that comment was that now there's no excuse to, if you have any sort of paid Zoom account, there's no excuse to be hosting meetings and webinars at anything less than HD. So that's the main takeaway.
They're basically leaving it to anybody who notices can get it 720p. They're just not going to hand it out to everyone, because bandwidth does at some point cost money. Like it's not, so if you're not asking, they're not going to give it to you automatically, but you can ask for it. It's kind of like not getting water at a restaurant until you ask for it. Go ahead, Rupert.
So having 720 on your account does not enable you to bump other meetings that you attend as an attendee to 720. The way to do that is you can have a Facebook portal, but I have a Zoom room specifically for that purpose. I either attend other people's meeting with that room, which is over here, and I can bring it over here, or I just bring that room into the meeting for a time and it bumps that meeting to 720, regardless of the settings on the host's account.
Spreading the love automatically. I love that. Like wherever you are, wherever Rupert is it's a 720p world. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
The other thing that you have to remember is that if you don't have a 720p camera, you're not going to get 720p. If you've got a computer that's underperforming, you're not going to get up to 720p. And of course, if your internet is not to where it needs to be, you will definitely be downgraded if you start any meetings.
Yep. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next, and he says the Blackmagic Design URSA Mini Pro cameras are on the Netflix approved list, but the Pocket Cinema cameras aren't. Why would that be?
Stuart?
I will tell you 2 reasons. Firstly is conjecture, and the second is the truth. The conjecture one is because Netflix only wants people to have decent cameras, and they don't want small budget independents who can't afford a good camera. That's conjecture. The truth is they probably just haven't tested it yet and made sure that it's up to their standard. That's it in a nutshell.
I for the things that I've shot a lot with my Pocket Cinema that look better than a lot of things on Netflix. so I'm pretty certain they just haven't gotten around to the full testing, given that it's almost the same chip as everything else that we see with the URSAs. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is back with, what do we seem to be at the intersection of in IT, media production and human communications? What skills contribute to an effective professional in this industry?
Jason?
Aside from the obvious honing your craft, you have to know a little bit about a whole lot and then a lot about a little bit of, all the way around the entire production workflow process. Other than that, you just have to really like people.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
The first time I saw it was in Vegas. The sound guy was talking about how he had to create a cloud account so he could put his profiles into it. That's when I realized the intersection was happening. So it really depends on what you're doing, audio, video, because you don't need to know how to do video in the cloud if you're just doing audio, of course. So networking is a big one to anything, and any certification, even if you don't do the certification test, is a great way to start it.
Good, Bill.
Curiosity in your own entropy. Curiosity because you got to constantly be learning. Entropy because all your older information is becoming obsolete very quickly nowadays because things move along so fast. So you have to constantly be retraining yourself.
Go ahead, Sky.
And I was at the beginning of when we moved from film to digital, and now that we've eliminated even some of that pass through. So I'm still working with the same humans. So yeah, it's that relationship and being good at the task in front of you, but also being well liked. Bring coffee.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. The thing is that's one of the reasons that I think that this community is so important, is that we as a group can constantly be helping each other from all those different directions. And again, storing knowledge in each other by sharing what we know, by helping each other learn. That person that we helped yesterday with what they were doing with Zoom is going to be someone that's doing something, like Tony Mobley. We sat there and helped him figure out how to get mics on and how to get some lighting and how to everything. Now he's got his own show that we're learning from because we're doing the back end of that, and he just, and that's that we see that happen over and over again in this community, and that allows us to continue to grow in that direction. Next question.
Serge Bowden here in the panel from Montreal, Canada. Does the new iPad mini make you switch from iPhone Pro Max to the normal size iPhone Pro and have the iPad mini in case you need more than the 6-inch screen?
Go ahead, Jason, real quick.
Not a chance. I'm all about the smaller form factor. And no, it's not a 6-inch screen on the iPad mini. It's 8.3 inches.
Serge.
Yeah, but for me, it's all about when I'm on the road or anything. I want a smaller size. Even if they do a mini with the Pro camera, I will consider it. It's smaller in my pocket, and depending on the situation, I tried the iPhone 12 Pro Max, and I found it too big for me. I just switched to the regular Pro.
Next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. Would it be easier from an audio and video sync perspective to route audio directly into the ATEM from an audio interface or mixer?
Go ahead, Jason.
It would be easier to route directly into the camera, not to do anything other than that. But your second best would be a mixer.
Go ahead, Leo. Excuse me, Leo.
Answered.
And Courtney?
Yeah, Jason said it will be in sync better if you go into the camera, as long as the camera has decent preamps, and if it has XLR inputs, that would be even better because it'll come in and sync and stay in sync throughout.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says Netflix only has Premiere, Media Composer, and Resolve Studio in their Production Technology Alliance list of NLEs. Can you meet their specifications with content edited on Final Cut?
Go ahead, Stuart.
You can meet their content or their specifications with content edited on any platform. You've just got to make sure it's the output. The thing about the list of the Alliance and whatever, these are companies that have agreed with Netflix to make sure that there are modules in the output stage of the programs to render at the settings Netflix wants you to use. So it's just a way of making sure it's a little bit more streamlined regardless of the program used. And of course, just to sync the boot in, if you want to do it quickly, do it on Edisons.
All right. So now we're changing subjects, and we're going to start talking about Office Hours 2.0. So, one of the things that, and if you have questions about this for Andy or for myself or whoever, you can go ahead and throw those in right now. Don't put any more first hour questions in. Andy and I started talking about this. I don't know when we started kicking this around. It's probably May or June or something.
Yeah, probably
like that.
May, right around when Zoom ISO came out, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we started talking about what would happen if we were able to start pulling all these raw feeds out and start putting them together and connecting them all into and rebuilding what we're doing here from scratch. And so I mostly just said this is what I think would be cool, and Andy then makes it happen. So and then Andy adds things that I didn't even think of. Oh, by the way, it can do this too, and I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be great. So Andy, why don't you give people a little bit of an overview of what you're working on?
Yeah, I'll spend just a few minutes on this so that we can dive into the questions, because I know people are going to be curious to see kind of how all this comes together. To sort of start and frame this up, I want to start by thinking about just layers of abstraction for a second. So going kind of meta for a moment here. The way that the Office Hours 2.0 system is designed, you have hardware infrastructure, right? That pile of black magic stuff sitting on top of a desk that actually manages all your video routing and infrastructure. And then you have sort of this logical engine layer that's, so for example, right, if you were going to do this in hardware, you'd have somebody sitting in front of all these devices, pressing the buttons on the panels or the breakout controls, and that's how you'd cut the show. The layer that we have on top of this is the Zoom engine, which is kind of a tentative name for now, but basically it's the thing that is connecting Zoom and the hardware and all these applications together to make automatic rules and policies for how the show gets cut. And the beauty of that is it allows you to then have a web interface or another abstraction layer on top of that, where you don't have to look at all the IP addresses and dials and knobs and all that, even though it's all in one piece of software. We simplify it one more layer so that all you have to do to cut the show is log into a website, put in your password, and you're greeted with all of your inputs with the constellation and some additional bonus inputs that I'll talk about in a few moments. But the goal of the system is to abstract the power. So you still have access to everything that's back there, but you don't have to deal with all the dials and knobs and complexities of operating it. So something that you can just sit back on your couch with your iPad and log into it, and now you have access to an incredible amount of power and hardware and HD resolutions and all of that. So that's sort of the guiding philosophy of what I'm about to show you. On the hardware side, so we've got a pile of M1 Mac Minis, 5 of them specifically, and a B-Link by Courtney. And it's all sitting together running the Zoom contribution stuff. And I'll show you what software is running on all of this in a moment. Connected to each of these M1 Mac Minis is a Sonnet Echo Express SE1, which is a Thunderbolt 3 enclosure that allows us to put in a DeckLink Duo 2. The DeckLink Duo 2 is what's giving us those unique SDI outputs of each of the participants. So 5 of these and 5 of those enclosures gives you a total of 25 outputs. Right now, we're only running 4 of those into the system for the actual component view, but we could have as many as 25 unique inputs at that point. So all those inputs go into a Blackmagic 40x40 video hub. And right now, that's just doing kind of one-to-one pass-through. So you can almost imagine, it's not doing anything of consequence at the moment. It's there so that you can pull in additional inputs later and be able to replace them, because the constellation has those 40 inputs as well. So right now, you can kind of just imagine it flows in and it flows out, no jumping around there. And of course, it goes into the constellation. The constellation is where a lot of the magic happens. And I'll talk more about what I made in Isadora to be able to communicate with it. But the cool thing is there was a huge firmware update to the constellation this summer, which really enabled a lot of this to happen. It allows us, because we have the Video Hub protocol, to be able to do what we need to do there. Now that MixEffect is compatible with it, it allows us to do the super sources really cleanly there from a software endpoint, so on and so forth. So it was really great that that firmware update was put in just before we started building this. We also have an MV16 to be able to create what I've been calling the Smart Gallery, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then I think because Alex just likes to put this in for good measure, we have a Teranex in there. I have no idea what it's going to do. I have no idea why it's there, but it's there.
When in doubt,
right.
There's very few times where you run into a project where you don't use your Teranex. And so, eventually when we want to put some kind of audio, some video input or something like that, having something that can just convert it from one place to the other is valuable.
Yeah, totally. Over provisioning, building for the future, right? And then we also have a hyperdeck in there for recording and potentially for playback. Haven't done too much on that for now. We have a bunch of these 4K display dongles, so all these Macs are running headlessly. We just tossed in the 4K display so that I can Apple Remote Desktop in and get that screen real estate when I need it. And then I think all this is going to go out eventually to an Elemental and out, so it can stream in 4K and all of that.
And currently, there's the original link there. We'll be replacing that with a UHD link next week, so that we can do 4K 10-bit out of the system.
Fabulous. Okay, so switching over to the software side, this is what I'm really excited about, because a lot of these logos are applications that we've talked about over the past year on Office Hours quite a bit. And what's cool about Office Hours 2.0 is that in my mind, it's kind of the culmination of all of those things that we've looked at, getting them together and talking to each other. And the glue that's holding all of it together is Isadora. So I'm just going to go around the cogwheel here. So Zoom ISO obviously is what's responsible for getting all of the participants out of Zoom at HD and into the hardware infrastructure. The reason that Zoom ISO is used, besides it's my baby, is also because it's the only of all these Zoom contribution options. It's the only one that is really remote controllable. You have the Zoom room, but that's going to be a bunch of tablets controlling all of that. You have other pinning machines that we could set up, but this is going to give you the most density with the most control out of all the options available. Zoom OSC is in here giving you information about the participants, who's got video on, who's talking, what are they doing, where are they. So this is sort of sitting in there giving us the information about the participation, what's happening in the meeting. Streamweaver is there to create the link from the cloud to the ground, so our show control data can pass between the cloud and the ground easily. We're using Apple scripts to be able to assist with the boot up sequence. So any application in this chain that doesn't have a remote control interface, I just have to run an Apple script to be able to remote control. And that pairs very nicely with Osculator, which is the next link in the chain. Osculator allows me to execute an Apple script from an OSC command. So on whatever computers need the setup, Osculator is running, and then the Apple scripts are triggered by the master Isadora control. Mix effect obviously is playing a critical role in the way that the super sources are defined, and that has a very close connection to Mukana in this system. So Mukana is telling us now, thanks to Chris's great work, who is answering a question. And that's why you guys have jumped into the panelist view and built all of that out for us. Now we know who's answering a question. That information can flow into Isadora, and I can tell Mix effect, hey, make a super source of the people answering this question. And Adam was really generous in creating an update to Mix effect that allowed me to set the sources of the boxes in the super source from OSC so that Isadora can control it. The user interface is the next link in the chain. It's something we're still working on. Jonathan from my team is really looking at this specifically. And this is going to be in universe control most likely. That's going to sit up there in the cloud, and it'll be pretty. So Isadora does have user interface control options. But the idea is that Isadora is going to have all of like the IP address entries and the status reports and all the really technical low-level details needed to service and do maintenance on the system. But Universe will be there as the actual pretty front end to be able to interact with the system and all of that. ATEM OSC is going to be what allows us to remotely control the constellation. So when you want to cut between inputs or put something on a different ME or whatever that is there, you can do that. Black Siphon is the program that I think a lot of people get confused about. So I'll spend a quick second on that. So the idea of Black Siphon and the reason that we use it with Zoom ISO, you could take a Zoom room, have it output to NDI, and then take one of those Bird Dog NDI HDMI encoders, and you could put that in there, and it would decode the NDI feed and then shoot it out the HDMI line. That would be a converter, right? Black Siphon, while it is another piece of software that's external to Zoom ISO, isn't a converter. It's just terminating the other end of the chain, right? So you can think of that Zoom ISO is serving up the video frame as kind of like the bare copper on your cable, and then Black Siphon just sort of sits on that and clamps it out into the SDI line. It's not converting anything. It's just taking the video frame that Zoom ISO makes available, and it puts it and posts it on the deck link and allows you to route that. That's one of those programs that didn't have remote control options because it hasn't had any feature updates in 7 years, and honestly, it hasn't really needed it because this has been kind of constant for quite a while, but it didn't have those remote controls. So we have an open source Apple script that allows it to be configured remotely. And then finally, because I didn't have a Mukana logo, I put the Office Hours logo, but Mukana plays a huge role in all of this. And that's, again, the panelist view is informing all the decisions we're making here about the participation of the panelists. It's telling us what's happening and who's doing what. And I'm not going to get too much into it right now, but I will show you the Isadora patch at a high-end view in just a moment. And then I suspect I'll use it to answer a lot of the questions that are piling up in Mukana. So the last thing, I want to just talk about the inputs as an overview. So what is actually going to be available to the TD when they're doing this? I can go picture in picture. Hooray. So the obviously you're going to have your 20 participants. They're going to come in at HD. And if any of you look at the gallery view right now, as Alex sort of stole my thunder on, but all of you are sending, right? You're all sending in 1080 right now. You're all coming in really well.
Like, wow, this looks so clean. Yeah.
Now, it might not be every single one of you because I set this up at the top of the show and then didn't turn it on because we haven't worked everything out yet to do that. But most of you should be sending 1080, and especially if you see yourself on the Office Hours 2.0 Zoom OSC client where there's a camera in a dark room pointed at a screen of our multi-view. So you should be able to, if you see yourself there, you should be sending at 1080 in theory. Then we have the smart gallery, and the smart gallery is basically, I'm kind of mad now that the term smart gallery has been taken by Zoom as of Zoomtopia this week. But the idea of the smart gallery is that it's a 16 up of the most frequent participants who are speaking in the conversation, right? So if we have 20 people, but we want to go to a gallery view, it's I think a 16 up makes a lot more sense to look at. But who do you put in there? And that's where Zoom OSC reporting on who is speaking is so important, because it's telling the Isadora file, hey, add somebody to, add a number to the speaking score, and then using the video hub protocol inside of the constellation, set those outputs to the MV16 appropriately. So it's rerouting inside of the constellation who's flowing into the MV16 so that we always see the most 16 frequent speakers when we cut to that shot. The active speaker being cut in hardware, it seems like, oh, well, Zoom already has an active speaker. Why don't we just take that in as a source? But if any of you have watched the active speaker on the show for a while, you'll note that what happens is there's sort of a frame stutter right when it happens. It comes up maybe at low res for a second, and then it bumps up, and maybe the audio kind of slides out of sync for a second as well. It can get kind of weird. It's a software cut. We have all this hardware here. We might as well put it to use, right? So when Zoom OSC reports that somebody is taking over as active speaker, on ME2 inside of the constellation, it's going to cut to that user. And then ME2 will be available to the TD to cut to, so that they'll be able to just kind of put it in auto mode. Just follow the active speaker. So Zoom OSC is reporting that. The hardware is doing the cutting. We have now a very clean cut, constant resolution all the time, constant sync all the time, happening inside of the hardware.
And also we can use that over time to refine how it works. So by taking over that auto cut, we can decide we want to have different attacks. We want to have different ways that it manages it. So we have once we have that route, we can add things to that route that refine the experience.
And we've talked about soft selection as well as being one of those. Just like, I'm going to tap on these people so we can auto cut to them as they're engaging, and then we can tap on this next group and they can go to that as well. With individual attack and decay, which we demoed a couple of weeks ago, that we actually have that ready to go. So that'll be a lot of fun. I talked a little bit about the reactive super sources. Yeah, whenever you're a panelist, you're hitting that hand button in the back end. When that question becomes answered, Mukana is posting that to a web address that Isadora is doing a GET request for. We get the names, it goes into my database, and I find your input numbers into the constellation, and then I tell Mixeffect to create a super source of those input numbers. And that's how the super sources of the speakers are going to work. We have the HD graphics. I've been calling that sort of the Carl feed, but whenever there's somebody injecting graphics in, it'll be on the other side, and then we'll be able to pull that in. And I'm working more with Aaron right now about what that graphic system will look like, as well as the overlays, right? Automatic lower thirds. We know who's speaking, we know who's on screen. We should be able just to have the TD hit go lower third, and whatever the correct titling for that moment is should just appear. We're trying to make this very easy for the operator at the end of the day by automating a whole lot of the back end. They don't have to think about building the super sources or who to put in the gallery or which graphic to queue up or all of that. It's just served to them, and they can turn it on or turn it off at will. They can focus on the art of the broadcast without having to focus on all the technical details of how to make it happen. Speaker highlighting this idea that, like, when we have the 16 up from the MV16, we need some sort of visual way to indicate who is speaking, so we can use Isadora to be able to dim everybody else except for the person who's currently speaking, and then adjust that fade as we go through, because we know the speaking information and we have a media server ready to go to do that. And then, of course, the live questions and subjects flowing in from Mukana as well. We'll continue to work with Chris on that to be able to get that to go. So that is sort of the overview of what the system is supposed to be, and most of it is in place. Again, the brain of it, the thing that glues it all together, is the Isadora patch, which I'm just going to throw on screen real quick so that we can kind of get an appreciation for it. And I think there'll be two reactions to seeing this. Some of you who may not use Isadora very often will say, like, oh my gosh, that looks scary. And then those of you who use Isadora often will be like, wait, that's it? And the idea of this, the last thing I want to say is that I've tried to build all of this with modular design in mind so that you all can use this in the future. So I've made a ton of plugins for Blackmagic. I've made plugins for Mukana. I've made all sorts of different user actors and nodes and JavaScript things that are just available as plugins that you can pull into your own projects and build your own way. So this is extremely condensed considering all the things I just showed you that it can do. And it's just designed for you to wire up however you want. Later today, you'll get an introduction on Isadora from Tlaloc, and I'll be there as well, and we'll have a good time getting the introductions. But just want to give you the sort of the bird's eye view of this is the only thing that actually, this is all it is. At the end of the day, it's just this patch and the peripheral software, and it makes all this happen. So super excited about that. Super excited to take your questions and dive into how it all works. But thanks for the time.
And the real goal here is to just change the way we think about how we build shows and how we build events and how we interact with each other. That's that's what we're trying to kind of pave a new way towards. And we couldn't do it without Andy. So without a lot of the software developers that were in that list have been working with Andy and making adjustments. And Adam and Mark and many others are doing things to their software to make this work, like to open these things up. It's been an incredible group effort to figure out how to get all of this stuff, kind of working together. And I think that it really potentially could build an entirely new kind of media, that we've been pioneering here for a year and a half. Okay, let's jump into the questions. First question.
First one comes from Mike Emmett in Melbourne, Australia, and he says, I'm excited to see the Office Hours 2.0 show and really interested to see the Isadora lab in after hours. If only it weren't for the wrong time zone. Is there a chance it might be recorded and streamed into a breakout room at a later time?
We're not going to record this one. The after hours thing is a complicated issue for me, recording. We'll get back to that. Let me talk to a couple people about that. We may record it. We may put it into a breakout room and record it.
And it's not your last chance as well. Like there'll be plenty of opportunity to engage with Isadora, and I'm sure we can come up with maybe a more lab-like structure once we're comfortable with it. But this isn't your only chance to learn about Isadora for sure.
Yeah, I would highly recommend going at 9:30 today, and in 9:30 Pacific Standard Time to go there. We'll take a look at there's a whole bunch of issues there. So because I have to figure that out. But be there for that. And we're going to keep on talking about Isadora. Like, just know that, as Andy said, missing something, there's just going to be a whole bunch of people that now understand Isadora, and now you can answer questions. We're going to do other labs. We're going to do other setups. We're going to do, the more we've worked on Office Hours 2.0, the more I've gotten clear of what the power of Isadora is, and the fact that we need to get a lot, we need to get a lot of people that understand it, because we can just build things that I don't know how else we build without it. Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas says, how will the Office Hours 2.0 backend handle audio-video sync, since the audio and video are traveling through different paths?
Go ahead, Andy. Or did you want
Yeah, so the way that audio is handled in Zoom ISO is sort of a complex topic, but I'll take it very specifically to just how we're going to fix it here. So you have all these Macs that are lined up together, and they all are receiving the same muxed audio feed, right? It's all coming down the chain. That can be captured with audio hijack and brought out into your audio infrastructure and then brought back in. The good news is we took a lot of care when we built Zoom ISO to make sure that you don't have drifting sync. So a couple of the folks that I've helped here before, you have to sync up your audio, but it's the same as if you were syncing up wireless mics in a venue and you had your camera system there. Like you get the offset, you dial it in, and so long as you don't change the chain, that offset should be good for the rest of your time using that system. So it's a static offset. So it should be something that you can calculate and apply versus something that you have to live figure out where the delay is shifting to.
And one thing to note is that we see a future someday where we're going to get ISO audio, and then I see a future somewhere where you could literally lift up your phone with a test signal, point it towards the camera, and it'll just figure out the sync and resync every channel as needed as it goes through. So I think that there's a lot of ways once we get the individual ISO audio, we can do a lot of other things as well. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back with, could the Office Hours 2.0 backend conceivably communicate with an external audio mix engine if connectivity to that engine was added to Isadora? For example, muting and unmuting panelists when they are spotlit and routing audio where it's needed.
Go ahead, Andy.
That's most of that today. With Zoom OSC, I have the ability to mute and unmute people at any kind of rule that I want with Isadora, so you're covered on that front. And most of your audio consoles are going to support OSC because it is, after all, open sound control. It was built for the consoles. So the X32, for example, has a robust library of OSC commands that we could do for spatial, we could do for bringing in and out audio, reverb, all that stuff could be remote controlled in the console through the OSC interface. So it has it today. Isadora doesn't have multi-channel audio itself, but we wouldn't have Isadora handle the audio. It would be handled by the by the hardware, and then we would just control that hardware. That's the guiding philosophy of the whole system.
And at some point, and we don't know, when we get all these ISO tracks is where we can also start to experiment with things like, as Andy said, spatially positioning people based on their position in the super source, that kind of thing. It can be done reactively. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again with, would the viewer and panelist experience change significantly on the front end with the Office Hours 2.0 back end?
The viewer experience will not be in Zoom. So while we're using Zoom as a backbone, we will post it into Zoom. So if you want to be in, the goal, what I think is going to happen is that after hours becomes something that runs 24/7, like we just reset it after the show or whatever. But basically, and then the panelists go into a breakout room. They just walk through, they're hanging out with everybody, and then they just wander into the breakout room for the event. And then then you could watch it. There might be a viewing room. There might be a viewing room where you can watch the behind the scenes, so you get to hear all the comms and hear everything that's going on. And then there could be one where you just go in as a viewing room and you can all talk amongst yourselves, like a Mystery Science Theater, like we do with the second year experience. And in a room that you can just watch, like you could watch together. And so we're going to have a couple different views. One of the reasons we want you to hear the background and be able to have the behind the scenes is that our goal here is to, as we build this up, is to train everybody to do it. So that lots of people know how to use it. Lots of people use it in their own events. Lots of people do that type of thing. Outside of the show that we do every morning, our goal is to start making that hardware possibly more available. And eventually people like Jonas will do most of it in the cloud. And so that's totally fine. I need it for a very specific thing that's can't do it in the cloud, but I'm hoping to inspire other people to do it in the cloud so that we keep on, the goal is to change the market faster than it can respond. Go ahead, Andy.
I think one of the important things to note about the panelist experience is that it's significantly lower friction and lower latency than other solutions, where you have them each calling in individually and they're getting a return feed, right? This is just log into Zoom and participate in the conversation on Zoom. This system is a spectator on that conversation. It's not bringing you out into individual breakout rooms and then pumping you back. Again, that has its place for sure. But for a low latency, low friction conversation, it's just plug and play for you as a panelist.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
But I noticed if I pin your little sample video that's in the gallery there, it's about a 2-second delay on that image. Would the panelists see that 2-second delay, or is that just a result of the way that you're processing it now for that particular view?
This is on its way out, so you're watching it on its way out to the servers, and as it travels through the hardware. Again, the panelists aren't receiving anything other than a courtesy view back from the system, even if even that. That itself might even be distracting, but you're just logging into Zoom and having a conversation with the panel on your gallery here, and that's all you have to really worry about. There's nothing integral about the latency within that system because nothing comes back to you unless maybe it's there for monitoring, but it's not there. You're not having a conversation with anything that's being returned back from the system.
Yeah, and for the viewer, we're going to basically be ramping this up to. For the viewers who are there, the producers that are watching, this will eventually go to a 4K HDR, first HDR10, and then potentially a Vision, mix. So without being limited to this, we can now start turning all the dials up, and then we can also take the SDR feed and push it out to other platforms and everything else from AWS. So I think that there's a lot of different places that we can take this once we get it going. So the end for the viewers, the quality will be significantly higher. 1080p scaled up to 4K will look okay. 4K graphics with the super sources will look amazing because they will be pixel for pixel 4K. When you're watching them. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Douglas Carmichael again, and he says, "Did you have it to write any custom actors in JavaScript for Office Hours 2.0?"
Go ahead, Andy.
Yes. So I've spent a lot of time doing a couple of different things in Isadora. I built plugins for all of the logic. So thinking about the rules and speaker scores and all of that to control the multi-view, that's been written up. The database in Zoom OSC is something that I spent a lot of time on a while ago building out. So now
we lost him.
My client crash out? Nice. Oh,
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
So I have a copy of that in Isadora. All the vectors for my, do I keep? rats, I'm going to have to reboot my client here. But the answer is yes. I have a lot of plugins that are very cool. I'll tell you.
And a lot of those plugins are running right now. So let's jump to we had a question a little further down. Rupert asked, while Andy's restarting, I can answer a couple of the questions that I can answer. Does 2.0 require on-site staff to master control? Only to fix things. So like literally only to tweak things. The whole design around it. JJ is the tech support. JJ and Kevin Hansen on our end a little bit, but is the I need to plug something in or I need to move something around, but the entire system is designed to be run remotely. So it's this little ball of gear that is all tied up together that's connected to the internet, and it is designed for everyone. My goal was to build something that we would build that anybody could log into from anywhere in the world. If we're successful at it, we're hoping that we attract 20 or 30 people, the teams that are working on the graphics, someone working on the edits, people working on the, where the questions are coming in and all the other bits and pieces every day, so that we create this incredible show around it. And we use that show to learn how to do these shows, and how do we make all of these work, and we get to know each other. So the best way to network is to work with other people. So this will be a place that, it'll be one of the things that you can do. I always think about the progression as, you start watching Office Hours on YouTube, then you end up in watching it on Zoom, then you might end up in Discord, then you end up in the panel. But you want to get to a point where you're ending up, in the production teams, because that's going to be the best way to meet other people and learn faster. Go ahead, and then Andy, you're back.
I am back, but I'm good for the it's just maintenance, right? It's on-site is maintenance, but again, it's the abstraction layers that let all the control happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back up, and in this case, he says, as you build the Office Hours 2.0 engine in Isadora, did you ever find yourself in a maze of actors that was hard to follow logically or to debug?
Go ahead, Andy.
Lost in the sauce. Yeah, that I shouldn't have fear of that as an Italian, but no, it does definitely. It definitely happens. The way I try to structure it, and I can put up the image of it again, so you can see what the actual flow of it looks like. But I do work left to right and top to bottom. So, for example, over here is the and down here is like the state machine coming through Zoom OSC. It's telling us all the information about the users. That flows into the chip that is the database, which is over here. Then the database gets searched and used over here, and then it gets applied to outputs over here, right? So it kind of, then top to bottom, right, here is where the boot script is. This is what logs in all the Zoom OSCs into the meeting with a single button press. This is what opens up the Apple scripts and boots the black siphons and sets up all the SDI outputs. Then in here is where we do some of the configuration on those endpoints and joining and leaving meetings and things like that. And then processing during the meat of the show, and then leaving the meeting, right? So it's kind of top to bottom, left to right in terms of the flow of it, and that helps me keep things organized. I used to, when I was working more in the theater, I didn't really spend too much time being concerned with straight lines. As I started to build these database things, that's very, very helpful. So in Isadora, I'll make sure that anytime that I have a common set of nodes that need to connect to another set of nodes, I will take all their outputs, put them onto one line, and then split them back up on the other side, just to keep things compact and easy to read. But again, I think surprisingly, this is a very dense tree of programming. And that goes back to the earlier question about the JavaScript. Anytime I felt myself building a bunch of logic out in the nodes, I tore it down, wrote it up in JavaScript, and turned it into a single actor that does whatever I was doing with all those nodes. So you don't have to go through the same process. You can just pull my plugin and then use it.
The next question.
John Barker in Malmo, Sweden is up next. Does 090 own all of the mentioned equipment? And what happens when or if it is needed on another production?
Yeah, so 090 doesn't own any of the equipment, so that's being used for this. We looked at doing it inside. We did Mad in the Kitchen inside the 090 master control, but we ran into issues where we were having conflicts between what 090 needed to do for productions, and as we've rebuilt the master control just recently, and we're ramping it all up, and we're taking on more and more productions, it didn't seem tenable. So those are all things that I've acquired for this process that will. That will roll into Office Hours. We're just waiting for the 501c3, but that's the. But yeah, I've got all that to do this. So it's. But yeah, we didn't want to encumber the 090 system with our little toy, and it completely works completely different than what 090 does, and so it wouldn't even be compatible with that right now. So next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas. With Zoom OSC pulling everyone at 1080p, the gallery view does definitely look sharper in Zoom, but my incoming bandwidth does not seem to increase noticeably. So what's actually happening?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Well, actually, I was expecting you to go to Andy first, but there was just something I wanted to share. This is my statistics screen at the moment. Now, remember, I'm on the other side of the world to everybody else. I'm seeing latency consistent. I'm seeing 1920 by 1080 up and down. I'm seeing the same frame rate. It's not changing. But also, what's not changing is my GPU fan isn't cycling up and down, doing all the local conversion to down for like when I'm sending a lower resolution up to Zoom. It's all consistent. So it's probably using less power at this end.
Yeah.
So Andy, thank you. That's amazing. Yeah, I'd share that because that is just fabulous that it's so consistent.
Andy?
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add on that is that when it's hard to compare your bandwidth with Zoom because remember, everybody's sending multiple video feeds at every moment at different resolutions. What the client is using and actually pulling in varies based on the interface interactions, but you're always sending, in an HD meeting, you're always sending a low res, like a 180p, a 360p, and then in the HD meeting, you'll send either a 720 or a 1080 feed. And that's what because Zoom ISO was requesting that, none of you are going to, unless there's somebody in this meeting who is a 720 only client who doesn't have the ability to send up to 1080, will request you at 1080 all the time. How that affects your bandwidth, though, is going to be a little harder to read exactly because all those feeds are stemming and it's hard to know which ones you're pulling at any given time.
Go ahead, Rupert.
What I was looking at was, I'm looking at gallery view here and I have speaker view in a separate window, but I'm just looking at my incoming bandwidth at a network interface level. And so, a lot of the gallery, thumbnails look better. So I'm definitely receiving more detail, but my, actual incoming bandwidth at a network level, not in the Zoom statistics, isn't increasing noticeably. So I don't think those thumbnails are at 1080. They're obviously getting better somehow, but I just wonder what's happening.
Yeah. Jason, real quick.
I've been running extensive logging throughout the entire meeting today, and it is in the basement. It is the usage is just incredibly efficient. It's just impressive.
Next question.
Rupert McRae, who was just speaking in Dallas, Texas, says, could the setup like Office Hours 2.0 be co-located into a data center?
Eventually, but not soon. And we probably will never do that. And the reason we won't do it is because we will move into AWS before we put it into a data center. The main problem is that we have right now, we're still trying to figure it out. Like, oh, we got to put some more wires in here. Oh, we got to do some stuff here. And I don't want to try to stand up instances and pull them down. And I want to do HDR and play with spatial and play with all these things that the tools in the cloud just aren't really ready for yet. But we know where it's all going. Like we know it's all going to end up in the cloud. And so the problem is that we need to have the ability to experiment and to fix things and to have some sort of stability there. The problem with the data center is as soon as we put it in there, we now have to, the getting back to it, if we have to add another piece of gear or do another thing, becomes a thing. And so we would, having it just sitting in an office room that we can just walk into anytime that happens to have a 1 gig connection, is something that we take advantage of most of what we would get from a colo without having to pay for it and without having the idiosyncrasies of being in a colo. Next question.
John Barker in Malmo, Sweden is up next. There are a lot of pieces of software needed to run together to make a successful show. Would it be worth putting together a project to consolidate some of them into one Office Hours software?
I would say eventually, but I think that there are so many everything's got a special piece to it. And the advantage of having specialist pieces to do that, the problem is when you start to write an overall piece that just does the thing, is now we're limited to the thing that we're throwing the ball to where the receiver was, not necessarily where the receiver is. By having all of these individual tools with individual developers, it's like having a whole bunch of software teams that are building up, and we have their specialties. Like we're barely tapping the capability of Isadora. We're barely tapping the capability of Mix Effect Pro.
Yeah,
We're barely tapping any of these things, and so we've got tons of room to scale. And as soon as we start building a project to write it into a system, and that will happen. It's just that it's probably not the time to have it happen. What we want to do is be able to creatively continue to go, oh, I've got an idea and I can implement it with the stuff that I have, rather than having to write a bunch of new code or anything else.
Right.
The goal is eventually you're absolutely going down the right path. We want to build it into something that someone could just stand up in an AWS instance, like run a script and it just goes whoop, and now you can do a show like that. But still a little ways away. But you're on the right path. We're just not that far down the path. You were gonna say, Andy?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think also part of it is the team, right? So like Adam, for example, wakes up every day and thinks, how can I make working with super sources in the ATEM as clean as possible? And I try to work on, how can I make using Zoom as controllable and flexible as possible, right? So all these developers in that circle are working on their verticals very aggressively, right? So in addition to wanting to make sure that we have the feature sets and capabilities, having a team with that level of focus, because they have their own apps, is helping us quite a bit. So if we do eventually consolidate into a single piece of software, wherever that happens, whenever that happens, the same passion is going to be needed by those independent developers to build out all the features to make them the best that they can be.
And they're getting better products, and more people know about them. More people will know about them because of what we're doing. And so they're getting sales, they're having independent income, they're having things that are based on connecting, or that's our goal, so that they have that. And so they have a vested interest in that. And right now we couldn't build that kind of crew that would be focused. Right now it would all be a volunteer staff that would get around to it when we can, and that would be not conducive to what we're doing. Also, when they're interacting with all these other people, they're adding all these other features that we may need somewhere down the road. And so it's kind of, they're keep continuing to evolve where ours would stay static if we did that. Next question.
Rupert McRae back from Dallas. Is the Office Hours 2.0 setup built around Zoom meetings, or does it still work with webinar? And any differences in functionality either way?
Go ahead, Andy.
It can work in either. We'll probably deploy it in meetings because that's a little bit easier for what we're trying to do, and we don't necessarily need the webinar at that point. But as you can see, it's logged in today, and you can see that the 2.0 smart gallery is there. It's not currently doing the smart thing because I turned it off, but there's no technical limit. Zoom ISO can join a meeting or a webinar, and that's really all you need in terms of the contribution end of it.
Next question.
Rupert's back. This time he asked, could Office Hours 2.0 be operated with the Belfast method?
It's actually the next step past that, because it is abstracting all of that interface away from it. Now it's specialized towards what we're wanting. So the Belfast method is something that wants to, we can do a thing and run the mixer and run the switcher, and it's more flexible because different aspects can be kind of cobbled together for different kinds of shows. This one is really built around this kind of show. And we're building this out for this kind of show, and hopefully allowing other people or us to build other shows that are this style, that have but have an interface that is completely designed, to make that work. Andy?
Yeah. So again, I love the Belfast method and everything that's going on there. The way I view it is, you've got a bunch of hardware on one side and in their own places, right? And then you have a bunch of operators over here running the edit programs for those, and they're sort of one-to-one connecting, or maybe somebody's doubling up to each of those, and then that's where Streamweaver and VPNs and all that is coming into play. What we're trying to do with 2.0 is create new interfaces, basically, that sort of wrap a bunch of this stuff and allow that person to have a low friction access to that point. Again, I know that the Belfast method itself sort of evades definition in terms of what actually is the method, but in my headcanon of Office Hours, the way that I view it is that it's about that's about remote operation, whereas this is it's still remote operation, but it's adding that piece of glass, that mezzanine layer for control, centralizing control, building interfaces, building automatic rules, and then also taking the step to try to think about lowering the friction to participate, right? Where you don't need to, in order to control the system, you don't need to have a VPN. Heck, you don't even need to have Streamweaver, right? Even my own best solution, we're coming past with this. You log into a website, you get a browser page, it's this interface, you get going. So we're not spending weeks and weeks training up a staff who have specialized network capabilities in order to be able to do this, who are trading IPs and all of that. You log in, you get started, you go. I think that, again, both are valid, but I think we're trying to do something a little different.
And there's even, I do think that as a lot of these things I think eventually find their way to merge. Like the Belfast method and the Mobley process, Office Hours 2.0, and all these other things that we're playing with end up in a. So, for instance, we could theoretically abstract the same thing we're doing here for music. Like this is the way we're going to bring people in. We're going to build the interface, much like Victor's interface was built. The Caheo concept. So anyway, so we have to get. I always feel bad because Victor was actually the first one. He doesn't have his own name. He doesn't have his own process. So it's the Caheo concept. Anyway, so anyway, so I think that all of these ideas are coming together, and what we'll end up doing is getting to a point where we can design that abstraction so that we can run these, run different kinds of events. But again, hand it off to creatives or people who are not going to necessarily they don't need to know all the technical ends of the back end. But what the mistake that everyone's making, I think, outside of what we're doing, is that they either leave it very technical or they want the computer to do everything. Like we just want it to do all the things for you. And what we're working on is a dance between making it simpler and easier to be creative, but not handing it off to the computer to do everything. It's it's a dance between the operators and the computers to do what they need to do to create, I think, something that'll be superior than either one. Next question.
Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, up next with how is hardware redundancy handled in the Office Hours 2.0 setup, or how would it be handled in production?
Well, one of the cool things about hardware is it's scalable, right? So you want to have a redundant feed for every participant, get another 5 Macs, and right. There it is, right?
Yeah, you can do it right now. There's none because I bought all the hardware. So anyway, there's no redundancy currently. R&D, someone can cut my pay in half if it doesn't work. There's no redundancy, but to Andy's point, we could absolutely add it. And then that would be, you could even have two. The way this works, and again, the advantage of this abstraction is that we could build 2 of these nodes, that are all built there, and they could be completely independent of each other, getting the same commands from the same person. Like they would just be doing the same thing, and we could have 2 of the, links pushing the 4K out as a primary and a backup to the CDN. And so literally they're just running there. If one breaks, we just turn off that link, and the other one, it just drops over to the other one, and it just keeps going. So you could absolutely build it. In fact, this probably has the potential of being more redundant than a lot of other, solutions, because theoretically those nodes would not need to be in the same place in the world. Like you could have 2 different nodes in 2 different parts of the world running the show, without anybody, and that would be on their own. Next question.
Stan Chan in Roseville, California says, isn't the software stack used to run this a little complex in terms of having too many integrations and possible failure points? Wouldn't a more greenfield design be a better approach?
Well, I think the thing to remember with if I may, Alex, the thing to remember with all of this is that at the end of the day, the only thing you need to get your inputs, your 20 users, and a gallery view is Zoom ISO. Like it just has to sit there and pump them out, and maybe black siphon in the middle, right? It's a very simple chain to get your core essential inputs into the system. All the rest of this is just making sure that like your super sources look fancy, and your gallery view is super relevant, and your titles and fancy effects and transitions. It's all the dressing, but the core of it is a very simple, direct hardware line to the constellation. So everything else is the beauty of making this intercommunication look nice and be reactive. But if you just want to sit in front, and again, 90% of the show will probably be somebody sitting and cutting between different looks or going over to active speaker, worst case. But most of this is handled in a very straight, like there's a through line through that system. It's very simple. And I think that, again, with proper redundancy, doesn't add too many failure points to the core show.
Yeah, and I think that the thing is that we just always want to be careful. I worked with a lot of companies that are doing lots of software development, and we have to be very careful about defining the system before it's been tested. So this gets into like agile development in the sense that right now we have the best of all worlds, which is that we have motivated developers that are partners that are helping to integrate all of these bits and pieces together that are some of the smartest in the world and great people to work with. And, we're going to add more. I want to try to figure out ways we can drag John Barker in and grab other people, have other people. Like I'm more interested in having more people work on it than less, because what I want to be very careful of is not pouring concrete too early. You know, like that, this is the, you know, like a lot of people, you know, they pour concrete the moment they have an idea, and they basically end up with like a weird art sculpture instead of a building, you know, so like a software version of a weird art sculpture that it's hard to figure out how to get from this room to that room and everything else. And so by doing this and cobbling it together with off the shelf hardware and software, we're able to think about what we want to do, because what's happening is as we do this, like as soon as 2.0 comes out, we're going to have 100 ideas of where it could go, and then we'll figure those out. And we've got a partnership with all these software companies that are going to allow us to scale up that idea, rather than going, oh, well, that's going to be, you know, 4 months of programmer hours to get that done. And we have to figure out how to spec that. And we have to figure out how to build we have to do a demo, or we have to do a pitch deck, or we have to do a thing. And this is why big companies move so slowly. So anyway, so what we can do right now is kind of work through all of those ideas and build something that no one's ever done before, because we're not, you know, trying to turn it into something like that. Next question.
Comes from Rupert McRae. Is comms integrated in any way, or does this need to be handled completely separately?
Currently, we are going to use Unity, and Tucker has gracefully offered to provide as much comms as we need. And I know that Jim would probably help too as well. So but Tucker said a long time ago, he said, whenever you get this thing going, just let me know and I'll just give you all the seats you need. So Tucker will most likely manage that process in what we're doing there. But yeah, so we'll probably use Unity comms for the teams, and then be piping them back in from behind the scenes. And eventually, do we abstract from there? Maybe, but right now it's a good model for us. Next question.
James Brooks up next. What do you think or hope will be the trickle-down effect of Office Hours 2.0 as we try to incorporate some of these techniques on a smaller scale into our own productions? Thanks.
My goal is that we make it, like right now it's really hard and we're trying to figure it out and everything else. My goal is to get it to a point where anyone in our group, people who have kind of built, you know, have worked on those edits and worked on those processes, say, hey, I've got a show I want to use the node for, you know, and they can use the node, you know, like, you know, so they're not trying to rebuild it, but this is just a node that's available for people to use. And eventually, as I said, eventually it'll be in the cloud and it'll be an instance, and, you know, we'll all pay, you know, $100 an hour to Jonas because he built the whole thing. Or to Jim because he built the whole thing. Like, you know, they you know, Jim or Jonas or Guy or whoever builds it out. Eventually, that can all be something that is relatively inexpensive. This is not something that has to be super expensive. And in the grand reality, I mean, I think it's approximately 20 grand worth of hardware that's sitting in that little room somewhere in that ballpark. And that's pretty inexpensive for production. You know, so I mean, to be able to do what we're talking about is doing a 4K production eventually with spatial that incorporates up to 20 panelists and interactively and actively cuts between all of them fluidly to have a conversation. It's not a bad investment. And again, if we're not using it all day, there's no reason why anybody has to invest in that. You know, like that it can be just something that people can use. And again, until we can get it done in the cloud, but that, you know, that I'm not worried about doing it in the cloud. You know, maybe that's a year. I see that as a year or 2 years away of doing at the level that we're talking about of getting all those things done. You know, much of it 90% of it can be done in the cloud today. And the other 10% is the stuff that I want. So, for a variety of reasons. And so I think that, anyway, so I think that's what we're hoping that other people use it. Other people, you know, and again, it'll be people who have kind of eventually certified themselves to use the system because they've operated all the different individual pieces of the remote team. So that's who will give access to the node, is people who have edited and they've run graphics and they've run audio and they've run all the other bits and pieces. And so we know that they know how to do it, and then they can build a team from the people who've all been, you know, working on Office Hours 2.0. So you end up with a whole lot of people who know how to do it. And then one person goes out and finds the organization that wants to do it, and there's already a team ready to use the node. Next question.
Rupert is back with, does the Office Hours 2.0 setup run on a dedicated local area network?
It's not dedicated, to be honest. Yeah, it's still, I mean, we can dedicate it for $125 a month. You know, so it's not like, it's still in R&D. And so, but we will eventually, I mean, obviously, as soon as it starts to scale, we will put a dedicated network in. to make it work. And again, in the building that I'm in, it'll cost $125 a month to go to 1 gig. So it's not that big of a deal. We're just waiting for we finally submitted all the paperwork for 501c3. so it's now in the IRS's hands about when we can start turning the whole system on. Next question.
Rupert's back with what health monitoring could be built into the system in terms of statistics, resource load, response times, and could automatic alerts be built around this?
Yeah, all of those things. I mean, that's just those are things in Isadora that just, as long as Isadora can see it, I think I think that you could do a lot as far as the health monitoring goes. And then of course, we can use other tools from a network perspective as well, and we could be fingering into the Zoom backends to know what those things are. And again, a lot of those things, reliability, measurability, all those things will come after we figure out operability. so that's the first piece that we have to finish. And we just wanted to give you guys give everyone a preview. We're only a couple weeks away. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I was gonna say the other thing with that is that there's a difference between can it be done in the cloud and how it would be done in the cloud when it comes to this idea of readiness and availability, right? Could you spin up a bunch of Zoom OSCs in the cloud, network those instances together, use the same sort of process to remote pin everybody, bring those in via NDI and do the same kind of thing? You probably could, but you would certainly need Zoom OSC to do that with all the backend operations. And I don't know if anybody has. So I think a huge part of this to me is the Isadora file. It's building out this logical tree and building out the rules and building out the connections and the automations to be able to get that to go. And it's because, again, it's more than just I have 20 sources served into my vmix file as NDI, hooray, I'm done. There's a lot more that goes into that in terms of the way that that's abstracted, the way that when that input should be there, how that input should be presented. And again, it could be done with web requests and NDI and all of that in the cloud. But I think my goal is that by building this Isadora file, there's enough plugins that you could build it that way without having to spend weeks and weeks and weeks figuring out all the little things. You just grab the plugins and go. But I know it's kind of tangential to the health monitoring thing. But again, the idea of the system is that we build it, and then it has these little droplets that kind of come off of it that are all the plugins that you can put together.
And the interesting thing is that really the flow of Isadora and Universe and everything else is the template for a unified solution someday in the future. But again, I don't expect that to happen anytime soon. I think that there is a real power to having a lot of great developers working together that are independent, that are making that work and figuring it out together. And I think that we'll keep piecing those things together. Next question.
Rupert again, if Office Hours 2.0 was all rack mounted into a self-contained rack, how many rack units would be needed?
I think the current system right now would probably fit into a 22U rack. I think that it would all, if we put it, we'd have to reestablish some of the stuff. I bought the cheaper sonnets because it's my money. So I didn't buy the rack mount sonnets are really expensive. That'll handle the cards. And so they were 3 times more money. So I was just I'm just going to buy the cheaper ones. So it won't rack well right now, but it would probably rack into about 22. I think 22 units would probably fit it well. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, would ATEM OSC be used to replace Mix Effect and take the iPad out of the loop? I've never heard of iPads being powered on 24/7 in a production environment. Most mobile devices are used in an intermittent way.
Go ahead, Andy.
So ATEM OSC does not do what Mix Effect does, and they're both used in the system. ATEM OSC is what's doing the cuts and different things there, and Mix Effect is completely optimized for the sourcing and building out of the super sources. I would sooner put Mix Effect on one of the M1 Macs than take it out of the equation because it is rock solid at doing what I need it to do. Yeah, you could. I would if the concern's about the iPad, just run it on the M1 and go through the hoops of figuring that out. But don't take Mix Effect out. It's really doing a great job right now.
Yeah, and I'm considering putting 2 more Mac Minis in, one to extend our ability to 24, and then the other one to run Mix Effect Pro. So I'm definitely leaning that direction right now. I'm just waiting for another check to come in, so before I can buy more things. All right, next question.
Alex 40 Goldner, up next from London. Are there any recommended recent shows showing Office Hours 2.0 in action? Super sources, graphics, lower thirds, and so forth.
Not yet, but we're giving you this is
Coming soon
coming
to a Zoom near you.
Yeah. So it's you're going to see it in the next couple of weeks, probably 3 weeks, I think, something in that range. You'll see tests happening sooner than that, and then it'll be a disaster when we start. I just want to make sure we manage everybody's expectations. When we started, there'll be things flying off and pinning things. It'll lots of bolts flying everywhere. But the goal is that by November 1, it'll be pretty clean, and then we're going to start really creating cool things. We're just talking about where we're going right now, but every time Andy and I meet, we talk about what we could do with this, and it just keeps scaling. So we just want to get it first working every day, and then we'll figure out what to do with it next. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. What type of power conditioning and/or backup are you using for the Office Hours 2.0 setup?
APC UPSs. That's what's backing it up, and that was because we lost. There was like a little click in the building, and obviously the whole thing went down, and we were like, okay, we got to put a UPS in there. So there's a UPS in there. Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles is up next with, could you give more detail on how you're doing the graphics?
The graphics we're still working on the graphics there, but those will be generated by mixpre-three, for the most part. Aaron Hushel just working on them right now as far as some ideas and playing around with thought processes and everything else. We're going to try to drag Alex into it as well. I didn't want to have him, push too much on Alex. He's working on some other stuff with me, but yeah, I'm sure we'll have him collaborate as well if he's open to it. But we can build those things again, like anything else, like any other graphic. So again, this also means that if we want to have playout systems, if we want to have key fill outputs, if we want to do all those things, are just pieces of hardware that we just throw in that feed into and the nice thing about the Constellation is it's scalable. We've got a lot of inputs, so we can keep on just adding things to it. And then it's just a matter of, and we're working with other developers to make sure that they can be seen as a hyperdeck or be seen or just be operated directly from OSC, so that we know that kind of stuff can be, and not just that, but for graphics and for other things like that, all those things can be tied in. So we're trying to kind of tie the whole thing together. Next question.
Jason Panks in Nashville. What about audio mixing? Is there an option for a Dan Dugan style auto mixer?
When we get ISOs, right now we don't really have that, but we could definitely do that. And again, like something like the Behringer would do that automatically. We don't need it. That's going to be needed for other shows that aren't us. For our shows, and most of the shows that will be done with this will be our shows. People wanting to do other shows with our teams. We don't need it as much because we have such good technique. So the panelists have such high technique that we don't need that as much, the Dan Dugan auto mixing, because we turn our mics off or we have a lot of filtering. But that's one thing to think about there. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, could you add real-time translation to the back end, to or from panelists and multiple caption streams for viewers to expand the reach of Office Hours 2.0 to languages other than English?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you could. Yes. It's a thought. It's a seed right now, not a tree, but a seed. That tech again. These are the things that why you leave it open right now is you figure out all these things, but adding that in is adding a computer with some AI. Like it's not or a service that can be done real time. It's not something that is we have to come up with. Next question.
Isaac Lay in Dayton, Ohio said, could the Sonnet boxes with Decklink cards be replaced with a TB3 USB-C dock, Thunderbolt 3 USB-C dock for HDMI out into an ATEM Mini with similar results? What's happening in software to break out the video feeds?
Go ahead.
So cue Chris Fenwick and the pluggable adapter, because this is your friend when it comes to how to get HDMIs out if you want to get into the ATEM Mini lineup. Yeah, there we go, right? So USB-C or USB-A uses the display link protocol. So it's going to basically render the frame inside of the CPU and send it out this way so it can use the USB connection. And two of these guys hooked up to an M1 Mac Mini is the cheapest way of getting a ton of Zoom participants out into the ATEM lineup in the HDMI-based workflow. We wouldn't use it for this system because we want to get to SDI, and the deck links just make sense, the reference clocks and all of that. But for more a different type of workflow working in an HDMI environment, this would be really great. If you have Intel, you could use an external GPU, or you could use things that take the display port protocol and break them out into multiple HDMI feeds. But on M1, you're limited on how many display port outputs you get, and you can't run external GPUs, but you can run these pluggable boxes. So check them out. They're really cost effective for getting into the ATEM.
And right now we're cutting the new ground. What is the best possible? This is what I tend to call an F1 implementation of this. This is the, like Ford builds an F1 or Ferrari builds an F1 or, Mercedes builds F1s. They don't sell those. They do them as a way to push all the technology forward and to think about all the things that could be done and all the technologies. So our goal is that once we get this working, that we can look at ways of again, dumping it back into the group and having all of you thinking about ways that you could do it with smaller kits. So if you want to use a big kit like ours, we figure out a way that you could use that. If you want to implement some of the stuff we're learning into your own, and that's the thing that we're going to do at 9:30 is the beginning of that with Tlaloc, is to start understanding Isadora so that you could build your own, from that area. And so we're going to keep on trying to inject that knowledge back into the system. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back with, for education and the education hour and Sundays, will the Office Hours 2.0 engine automatically not start the stream to YouTube?
In the beginning, we're not going to use it for the weekends. So we're going to use it on the weekdays, and the weekends will be a little bit more relaxed and be the old way of doing things. Maybe someday that'll change, but I kind of like the idea that we're just dumping back into, because it will take a small village to run, like when we turn it on, so it's not going to be, it's not going to be something that I can just turn on and make go, at least at the beginning. So I think it'll still go back to the regular one on the weekend. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, what type of database engine are you using? Are you using SQLite or an external server like MariaDB or PostgreSQL?
So I didn't implement those in Isadora. Isadora has a database actor in it. I chose not to use it and implement my own database inside of JavaScript. So it's a database, which really just means it's a bunch of synced up vectors that has the different user parameters that I care about. Reason for that is that I can then post those out as synchronized data outputs in Isadora. And when you look at the patch, when we break it down, you'll see that that's actually giving me a lot of additional flexibility in how we built it. So I implemented the databases inside of JavaScript, inside of Isadora. Again, not the way I'd build a huge scaling database. We have 20 participants. It's going to be fine. So it's much easier to do it that way.
Next question.
Kyle Hammond, does the user or audience member have control of the 16 up smart gallery if they want to see more than 16, or is that a program out setup?
It's program out setup. It's much more of a, they won't have a way to change those around. And it could either be the people who talk the most or the people who talk the last, like the last 16 or whatever. And so, but I think it'll be the most useful for folks too. We just found that smaller than 4x4 is just harder to look at as well. Next question.
Matthias Starr, I believe, in Sweden. Has anyone tried the portrait mode on Mac OS Monterey? I'm able to use it on both external and internal webcams. Works much better than the blur in Zoom.
I think that's a little out of the current conversation, but definitely bring that back in on another day, and we'll talk through it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, could you interface an external physical control surface to the system for audio mixing?
Yeah. Go ahead, Andy. Yeah, you could Xtouch, that kind of thing. Yeah. Next question.
Jonas Datel, Stuttgart, Germany. Which protocol is used to talk from Mukana to the ground?
It's just a web request in Isadora. It's the get URL text actor. And then I just put some wrappings around it, work with Chris, and figured out something to make it friendly. But it's just a get request.
Next question.
Jonas Datel in Stuttgart, Germany. What are additional features and functions that you would like to add?
How much time do you have?
I know, exactly. The thing is, Andy and I sit there, we brainstorm a lot of these things, and it's just like there's like 2 or 3, at the pace we're going, there's 2 or 3 years of development in our heads about what you could do, with what we're doing here. So, there's just so many things about, and the real end goal is how do we build this really global conversation that runs smoothly and looks great and sounds great, and people feel connected and have the information that they need, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot to do, and so hopefully we'll get to keep on working on it. Next question.
Jonas here wonders if it wouldn't be easier to have all this stuff done in code versus in Isadora.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
So yes and no. Could you write out a script that had all of the capabilities that Isadora has and implement that as a piece of software? Yes. But the devising part of it would be really hard to do in my mind. It's very easy for me to sit down in Isadora and lay this out and connect nodes and then rewire them and reiterate and then bring in other opinions and not have to worry so much about like, okay, now I got to implement web requests in this app and now I got to implement this. Like I can just deal with the design of it. And for devising and drafting purposes, Isadora is a huge accelerant for me. Obviously, you could make anything in the code backend and it would probably be more elegant and more efficient, but it would be a lot harder to get your hands dirty right away at day zero and figure this out now versus after you've built the app. So for me, it's more of a mentality thing than a strict efficiency thing.
And I think also from a creative process is that you want to, as long as you can hold out from pouring concrete, you want to hold out from pouring concrete, and coding is pouring concrete. It's now starting to go into this thing where, it's going to start defining what you do because of what you're doing, and being able to have a nodal system. Nodal is really the key to the operation. If I can have this open-ended, I can, okay, now I'm going to do this. And that whole thing that I just did with that little line would have taken two or 3 days to write that code, and I can just connect it. And then and if it doesn't work, I didn't lose those 2 or 3 days of development. I just unconnected it. Oh, that didn't work. And so again, there's somewhere in the future that maybe you do that as a service or you do it as a whatever. But the thing right now is that we can really evolve fast and, move fast and break things, without too much issues, and we're doing this all on a pretty shoestring budget. Next question.
Dirk Brewer in Guatemala says, exciting presentation of the Office Hours 2.0 project. He wants to thank everyone for thriving, who is thriving on thinking and doing outside the box and raising the bar. We learn every day with this source of innovation in media and production. How can we, and this is Dirk and others outside, collaborate as outside participants?
There's going to be a lot of opportunities as we ramp up, and I apologize that I get pummeled with one crazy job after the other, but I really am almost out of the puzzle here. But what I'm trying to do is I'm slowly starting to reach out to folks and put together teams to kind of start working on some of this stuff. You want to sign up. There's in Office Hours 2.0 is like, hey, I want to help, or I want to be part of it. Make sure to sign up, because we're going to start sending emails out to that. Finally, starting next week, we're going to start sending, like, if you're interested, we're looking for people who are interested in editing and doing the graphics and doing the things and doing, and so the idea is that we'll start to pull people together that are interested in the different areas and start to build teams around those. And the best way to do it is to get in and just help, and be part of that process. And the key to that is to, be easy to work with, show up on time, get your stuff done. like those are the things that, and just keep your head down and figure stuff out. But there's going to be a lot of opportunities with Office Hours. We're holding back a little bit until we get all the paperwork done for Office Hours. And then once we open up, we're going to start giving people lots of opportunities to do those things. And the goal is that the best way to learn, in my opinion, the best way to network, the best way to grow is to do it with a lot of other people, and so what we want to do is give you a lot of other people to work with where the circumstances are low, risk. You're very close to the ground. There's not a big place to fall. We can all play. If you have a bad edit, on an Office Hours, it's like, let's take some notes, not clients having 3 weeks of meetings, and so we're all going to learn together, to go down this path. Go to Andy.
I just wanted to say I have a hard out, so I'm going to have to leave, but it was good seeing everybody today. I was glad we were able to talk about this, and this is the first of many conversations. To Alex's point, like, we will continue to engage and have that. So thanks for letting me play with you guys, and we'll see you later.
And I'll answer the questions that I can answer, and then
thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Andy. Great work. Really, really great work. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, next question. So with so few audio video vendors having native M1 versions, what made you choose M1 Max for the system?
I just won't buy any Intel things. I mean, the future is M1, and it did what we needed to do. So it was, we bought one, tested it, made sure it worked, and then we bought the rest of them. So, but I'm not going to invest in legacy technology if I want it to run for a couple of years. Next question.
Rupert McRae, if the participants are remote contributors or running Zoom OSC, could some end-to-end remote control signals be sent to the far end, like Tally or even GPIO, for controlling external devices?
Oh yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Jonas.
That's totally possible. I could imagine a day where everybody on the panel has like a Raspberry Pi. We have a centralized interface, so we can. Oh yeah, that practical back there. Yeah, it would be nice if we can light that one up. And then, of course, the next step is to have small practicals that are interactive. So if the chat likes your answer, your light in the background is allowed to go off or something.
I mean, or and imagine having, we send something out to an artist and all the lights and all the cameras and everything else are all run by our crew, and they're all tied back in. That might be a separate interface that you get access to as the location controller, and so those are all things that are possible. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, could you add the back end to the engine to automatically create derivatives, podcasts, and so forth from each episode and to generate time index data for YouTube and archiving?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Yes, it's all, a lot of that is already there, and you could add the rest of that pretty easily.
Next question.
Courtney, in Hollywood, is there a single source computer or software used to create the lower third graphics and populated with the correct ASCII data on the fly as you cut to each person in full screen?
There will be a single computer that does that. so exactly what we use for that is still up in the air a little bit, but we're working on that solution. But yeah, there'll be a computer that generates that. Next question.
Juan C. Robles in Mexico says, are you taking any volunteers? Will you address that?
We will be. Yeah. So stay tuned for that. Just keep your eye out for those emails and sign up on the website. Next question.
Nacho Galindo in Madrid, Spain says, have you thought about using VisVector and vMix with NDI workflows instead of SDI with Blackmagic?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Yes. If you look at the Tony Mobile thing, we already have a workflow that's really similar. If you see, it's hard to see because we have it all on the Stream Deck, but it's really already that we have a lower thirds button that queues the lower thirds for the people on screen, for example. It's never static anymore. Everything is dynamic based on who is on screen. And
yeah. So it's all, it's definitely doable. Again, I have some specific requirements that make it difficult to do in the cloud, but I love the fact that Jonas and the crew are building something in the cloud and kind of doing it in parallel and figuring those pieces out, because eventually that's what we're going to need to know what they're figuring out. Next question.
Final one from Serge Blondin in Montreal, but I think it might have been answered. Is Andy's solution, could it be implemented in software in the cloud only? And I think we might have discussed that earlier.
Eventually, yeah. And so
a lot of stuff already is also.
Yeah. It'll be clearer when you see some of the stuff that we're going to implement with Office Hours 2.0, why I'm doing it in hardware. So there's when you see some of the guests that we bring on and the level that we can do playbacks and so on and so forth, it'll make sense. But and again, we know that where we're going, it's just that we're not there yet. Go ahead, Courtney.
What are you using the B-Link for, like Courtney? He showed that as part of the hardware, and I didn't understand what he was using it for.
What are we running with that? I think I know because I just bought a new one for it. So the little one isn't available anymore, by the way. So not that I'm bitter.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
I bought all the ones I could find.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't. You'd have to ask Andy that. I actually can't remember. I know that we needed one there, and it might be just the controller for the. It could be that it is the controller for.
It's a live stream directly to his Emmy. That's what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
it's a controller for the video hub or something. There's something there that needs to be managed.
Something that runs under Windows only or something.
Yeah, or just something that I think it was actually something that doesn't require a Mac Mini. It was like a low level thing that we just didn't want to pay more for. Like it was because
JJ says it's running Isadora.
Oh, it's running Isadora. Okay. There you go.
Okay. So, running the whole show. Then.
It's running. It is. It's the heart of the whole thing. Then yeah. So there you go. So, yeah. So I couldn't remember what it was because I just basically complain and ask for things. So all right. Now, hopefully, this has gotten you excited about Isadora, and so what we're going to do is in 15 minutes we're going to Tlaloc is going to really walk you through the basics of how to get started with Isadora. So it's pretty exciting, and so that's going to be an after hours. So you should go and move over there and watch that and ask questions and be part of it. And don't worry about whether you see it, whether we record it or not. Just go over and hang out. Whoever hangs out, we'll learn a bunch of things, and then we'll do it again. So it's I think it'll be fine. All right. Anyway, I think that was a lot of fun. And so that gives you a sense of hopefully where we're going with it and what we're doing. And it's exciting. And I just want to say that, Andy's doing incredible work. We've got a bunch of developers doing a lot of great work to make this happen, and we've got a lot of other people that are contributing to all of this stuff. But it can't be done. We wouldn't do it if it wasn't for the panelists playing so hard. Like there's no reason to do this without all of you. So I just really, and what I want to do is make sure that we provide a place that really acknowledges the level of work and effort that everyone here has put into the process, and have it be something that it's not just a Zoom thing that's showing up on YouTube. We're on the precipice of building a show that works unlike any other broadcast show, and in the not too distant future is going to be either competitive or better looking than most broadcast shows that we watch, and all of that is because of all the producers that show up and ask questions, and all of the work that's been done by all of the panelists to get up to speed and to be part of this, and to show up every day. So I just really want to acknowledge that it's not something that I'm doing or Andy's doing or anything else. It's something that all of us are doing, and all of us are going to get a chance to work on it. And I think that I think we can move the world with this engine, with what you're doing with the Moby process and the Belfast method and the Caheo concept and all those other things that are there, but all the things that we're putting together could really change the way we think about content. So anyway, thanks for jumping on this little ride. All right, I'm going to jump into the next one.
Wow.